Hello, class. Welcome to week 5 of Technology and War, the Science of Warfare. I know last week was a lot with the birth of the atomic age. I hope you found it interesting and engaging. As you can tell, I've worked a lot on this topic, and there's a lot I wanted to share, and a lot more I wanted to share as well, especially as you get into the Korean War and Soviet nuclear testing and Strategic Air Command. So, remember that this coming Sunday, your analytical research paper outline is due. So please be sure to get that in so that I can get you comments and you can get going on your final paper. As you will see going forward, the amount of reading and videos starts to go down starting this week. So this week, you're going to be reading a couple chapters from A History of Bombing, a couple of chapters from Law, Science, and Liberalism and the American Way of War. And we're going all the way from the Vietnam War to the First Gulf War. So, really covering kind of a wide array of areas here. Obviously, we could do an entire semester long course on just the Vietnam War, just the Gulf War. So, you're getting the kind of big ideas and themes about the role of technology and information. So, in lieu of giving you a lecture this week, you're going to get a lecture by Professor Gregory Daddis. He was a colonel in the U.S. Army, an official First Gulf War historian for the Army. But more interestingly, he's a very, very famous author and historian of the Vietnam War. So, fantastic books on looking at General Westmoreland and others. But he's today you're going to see his lecture, No Sure Victory: Measuring U.S. Army Effectiveness and Progress in the Vietnam War. So really looking at this concept of the science of war, the idea that if you could solve the problems or treat war like an engineering problem, that you could find the answer to essentially hack war. Right? The idea that with advanced computing power, advanced mathematical methods that you saw kind of at the end of the Cold War and computing power into the Vietnam War, that you could somehow calculate your way to victory. And we saw this through a number of programs, um, most famously through the body counts, the kind of infamous body counts of the Vietnam War. So he goes into great detail and depth at that, but also the Strategic Hamlet program in the Vietnam War, and kind of just broader ideas of the datafication of war and how searching for these metrics in this type of counterinsurgency warfare is really not a very useful thing, and how that kind of contrasts from traditional warfare. So really, really good lecture. He's way better at this than I am. He's an actual expert. So I hope you enjoy his conversation. Then as we get into the second half of the week, we're going to be talking about all the way from Vietnam to the first Gulf War and the kind of rise of this idea of surgical precision. Right, this is going to be a big theme in the coming weeks as well. The idea that warfare is becoming inherently more ethical, especially when the US wages war, based on the advanced technologies we use to kill. And so for this as well, there's a short video, about 20 minutes, looking at two very famous kind of post-structuralist authors, Jean Baudrillard and Paul Virilio, that look at the concept of technology, speed, and warfare. So it's a great kind of mashup of war and cybernetics and simulations that gets into these authors in a very accessible way from a philosophy YouTube video. So very engaging, very interesting, rather than making you dig into their work. So most of you probably are aware of the philosophy of Jean Baudrillard if you've ever seen The Matrix. So his philosophy is what inspired The Matrix, so you can get a kind of idea the type of stuff that he would write about war, technology, and time. So this is a really, really fascinating insight into the idea of war being perfected in the first Gulf War. Because remember, the kind of shadows of Vietnam and that kind of loss in Vietnam were weighing heavily on the military planners going into the first Gulf War. Colin Powell himself, when he came to, got his experience in the Vietnam War, was advocating against the first Gulf War, and that ended up being, one of the shortest, most decisive victories that the U.S. had ever engaged in. Right. Very, very short warfare, clear victory, so much so that Stormin Norman Schwarzkopf, the general, paraded through Disneyland in a kind of sign of victory. And there was this kind of collective sense in the early 90s that technology had solved our problem of warfare, that we had shed the ghosts of Vietnam, and could become quick and decisive, waged ethically with very few casualties, both civilian on their side and troops on our side. So one of the interesting pieces from Baudrillard's book, The Gulf War Did Not Take Place, he essentially makes the argument that actually more US soldiers were saved by going to war. If you take the average of US soldiers that would be killed in kind of just everyday life, accidents, things on base, etc., fewer died in the Gulf War than they would have if they had not gone to war. So really, really fascinating kind of play there, and you can see the kind of uh, statistics and direction that he's going with there. But it's a really fun thought experiment to think through. Um, and you can see the impact that the first Gulf War has, and that idea of a quick and decisive victory on the eventual war on terror and the second invasion of Iraq. So I'll leave you to your readings this week. I hope you enjoy. Going to get easier as we go along. Be sure to purchase, if you haven't already, Paul Schar's book, Army of None. We're going to start reading that in week 6. Really fantastic, accessible book. I don't want you reading too in depth into ensuring that you understand every technology that he discusses. The main point is to read through and get the big ideas, right? Read it like an airplane book almost. Kind of understand big concepts and things. Don't get bogged down in taking notes on what this technology or that technology does. Anything that I want you to really pay attention to, I'll highlight in lectures going forward. So remember this Sunday, analytical research paper outline due, and purchase your book, Army of None by Paul Scharr if you haven't already. So enjoy the fast run from the Vietnam War all the way to the first Gulf War. Have a good one. I look forward to your discussions.